Bos sauveli, the mystery of the Kouprey. In the dense forests and grasslands of Southeast Asia, there once roamed a magnificent wild ox that has become one of the most enigmatic creatures in modern zoology. The Kouprey, Bos sauveli, Cambodia's national animal, represents one of the most compelling mysteries in contemporary wildlife biology. This elusive bovine has captured the imagination of scientists, conservationists, and cryptozoologists alike, not merely for its rarity, but for the profound questions surrounding its very existence in the 21st century. Discovery and scientific recognition. The Kouprey's journey into scientific recognition began in the early 20th century, when French colonial administrators and naturalists first encountered reports of an unusual wild ox in the forests of French Indochina. However, it wasn't until 1937 that the species was formally described by French zoologist Émile Urbain, based on a young bull captured in Cambodia and brought to the Vincennes Zoo in Paris. Urbain named the species Bos sauveli in honor of René Sauvel, a French veterinarian and colonial administrator who had contributed significantly to the understanding of Southeast Asian fauna. The common name Kouprey derives from the Khmer words keo meaning ox and prey meaning forest, literally translating to forest ox, a fitting designation for this woodland dweller. The scientific description of the Kouprey marked a significant moment in mammalian taxonomy, as it represented one of the last large mammal species to be formally recognized by Western science. This late discovery underscored both the biological richness of Southeast Asian forests and the relative isolation of the region's wildlife from scientific scrutiny during much of the colonial period. Physical characteristics and morphology. The Kouprey stands as one of the most distinctive members of the wild cattle family, possessing a unique combination of physical characteristics that set it apart from its relatives. Adult bulls typically measure between 1.6 to 1.9 meters at the shoulder and can weigh anywhere from 680 to 910 kilograms, making them substantially larger than their female counterparts, who usually weigh between 400 to 680 kilograms. One of the most striking features of the Kouprey is its dewlap, the large fold of skin hanging from the throat and neck. This dewlap is particularly pronounced in bulls and serves multiple functions, including thermoregulation in the hot, humid climate of Southeast Asia, and possibly as a display feature during mating rituals or territorial disputes. The species exhibits significant sexual dimorphism in horn structure, which has become one of its most recognizable characteristics. Bulls possess impressive horns that can span up to 80 centimeters from tip to tip. These horns curve upward and slightly forward, with a distinctive feature being their frayed, split ends, a characteristic that appears to be unique among wild cattle. The fraying occurs naturally as bulls use their horns against trees and in combat with other males. Female Koupreys have much smaller, more delicate horns that curve gracefully upward and inward, resembling those of domestic cattle but maintaining a distinctly wild appearance. The horns of both sexes are typically dark in color, contrasting beautifully with their overall coat coloration. The Kouprey's coat varies seasonally and between sexes. Bulls typically display a dark brown to black coloration, particularly during the breeding season, while cows and younger animals tend to have lighter, more grayish-brown coats. Both sexes feature white or light-colored stockings on their lower legs, creating a distinctive contrast that aids in species identification. Habitat and distribution. Historically, the Kouprey inhabited the deciduous forests, forest edges, and grasslands of Cambodia, southern Vietnam, eastern Thailand, and possibly southern Laos. These areas, characterized by monsoon forests with distinct wet and dry seasons, provided the varied habitat requirements that Koupreys needed throughout their annual cycle. The species showed a preference for areas where forest met grassland, taking advantage of both environments for different needs. During the dry season, Koupreys would often venture into more open grasslands and savannas to graze, while the wet season would see them retreating deeper into forest cover for protection from the elements and to access browse vegetation. Water sources played a crucial role in Kouprey habitat selection. Like most large mammals in tropical regions, Koupreys required regular access to water for drinking and wallowing. They were often observed near rivers, streams, and seasonal waterholes, particularly during the dry season when water became scarce. The elevation range of Kouprey habitat extended from sea level up to approximately 200 meters, encompassing the lowland forests and grasslands that characterize much of the Mekong River basin and surrounding regions. This relatively low elevation preference put Koupreys in direct conflict with human agricultural expansion, as these fertile lowlands were also prime areas for rice cultivation and settlement. Behavior and social structure. Kouprey social behavior exhibited patterns typical of many wild cattle species, with herds generally consisting of females and their offspring, led by a dominant matriarch. These maternal herds could number anywhere from 3 to 20 individuals, though group sizes appeared to vary seasonally and based on resource availability. Adult bulls typically lived solitary lives or formed small bachelor groups outside of the breeding season. During mating periods, dominant bulls would join female herds, competing with other males for breeding rights through displays of strength and occasional physical confrontations. The frayed horn tips of males likely played a role in these displays, serving as indicators of age, experience, and fighting ability. The species displayed crepuscular activity patterns, being most active during the early morning and late afternoon hours when temperatures were cooler. During the heat of the day, Koupreys would seek shade in forest areas, often engaging in wallowing behavior to regulate their body temperature and protect themselves from insects. Seasonal migration patterns were observed in Kouprey populations, with herds moving between different habitat types based on resource availability and weather conditions. During the dry season, they would concentrate near permanent water sources and in areas where green vegetation remained available. The onset of the monsoon rains would trigger movements to higher ground and different feeding areas. Communication among Koupreys involved a variety of vocalizations, including low-frequency calls for long-distance communication between herd members, as well as visual displays using body postures and horn positions. Like many large mammals, they likely relied heavily on scent marking to communicate territorial and reproductive status. Diet and feeding ecology. As herbivores, Koupreys displayed flexible feeding strategies that allowed them to exploit various plant resources throughout the year. Their diet consisted primarily of grasses during the dry season when these plants dominated available vegetation in open areas. However, they also browsed on leaves, shoots, and bark from trees and shrubs, particularly during the wet season when forest vegetation became more accessible and nutritious. The species' feeding behavior showed clear seasonal patterns that reflected the monsoon climate of their habitat. During the dry season, when grass quality declined, Koupreys would spend more time browsing on woody vegetation and would travel greater distances to find suitable forage. The wet season brought an abundance of fresh grass growth, allowing herds to concentrate their feeding activities and reduce their ranging behavior. Koupreys possessed the typical ruminant digestive system, allowing them to efficiently process cellulose-rich plant material through a complex process of fermentation in their multi-chambered stomachs. This adaptation enabled them to extract maximum nutrition from relatively poor quality vegetation, a crucial ability in environments where food quality and availability varied dramatically with the seasons. Water consumption was substantial, particularly during the hot, dry season. Koupreys would typically drink twice daily when water was readily available, but could survive on less frequent watering when necessary. Their large body size and the hot climate of their range meant that access to water was always a critical factor in their habitat selection and daily movement patterns. Reproduction and life cycle. Kouprey reproductive biology followed patterns similar to other wild cattle species, with a gestation period of approximately 9 months and typically single births. Breeding appeared to be seasonal, timed to coincide with optimal environmental conditions for calf survival. Mating typically occurred during the late dry season or early wet season, ensuring that calves would be born during periods of abundant food resources. This timing strategy maximized the chances of successful reproduction by providing nursing mothers with adequate nutrition during the energy-intensive lactation period. Newborn calves were precocial, able to stand and move with the herd within hours of birth. This rapid development was essential for survival in an environment where mobility was crucial for avoiding predators and accessing resources. Calves remained closely associated with their mothers for the first year of life, gradually learning foraging skills and social behaviors essential for survival. Sexual maturity was reached at approximately 3 to 4 years of age for both sexes, though males typically did not achieve breeding success until they were larger and more experienced, often not until 6 or 7 years of age. The competitive nature of the breeding system meant that only the strongest and most dominant males would successfully mate. Longevity in the wild was estimated to be 15 to 20 years under optimal conditions, though few individuals likely reached maximum age due to the various pressures they faced, including predation, disease, and environmental stresses. Threats and decline. The decline of the Kouprey represents one of the most dramatic examples of large mammal extinction in modern times. Multiple factors contributed to the species' precipitous decline throughout the 20th century, creating a perfect storm of threats that ultimately may have driven the species to extinction. Habitat destruction emerged as perhaps the most significant long-term threat to Kouprey populations. The conversion of lowland forests and grasslands to agricultural use, particularly rice cultivation, eliminated vast areas of prime Kouprey habitat. The species' preference for forest grassland ecotones made them particularly vulnerable to land use changes that fragmented these transitional habitats. Hunting pressure intensified throughout the 20th century as human populations grew and firearms became more readily available. Koupreys were hunted both for subsistence and commercial purposes, with their meat, hides, and horns all being valuable commodities. The species' large size and relatively predictable behavior around water sources made them particularly vulnerable to hunting pressure. The series of conflicts that engulfed the region from the 1960s through the 1990s had devastating impacts on Kouprey populations. The Vietnam War, Cambodian Civil War, and subsequent periods of instability not only directly affected wildlife through military activities but also created conditions where wildlife protection was impossible and hunting for survival became widespread. Livestock diseases transmitted from domestic cattle posed another significant threat to Kouprey populations. As agricultural expansion brought domestic cattle into closer contact with wild populations, the risk of disease transmission increased dramatically. Koupreys, having evolved in isolation from many cattle diseases, were likely highly susceptible to pathogens carried by domestic stock. Competition with domestic livestock for grazing areas and water sources further pressured wild Kouprey populations. As cattle numbers increased throughout the region, the resources available to wild populations diminished, forcing them into increasingly marginal habitats. Conservation efforts and challenges. Despite the numerous threats facing the Kouprey, various conservation efforts were attempted throughout the latter half of the 20th century, though these efforts were often hampered by the political instability and ongoing conflicts in the region. International recognition of the Kouprey's plight led to its designation as Cambodia's national animal in 1963, a symbolic gesture that unfortunately provided little practical protection given the political circumstances of the time. The species was also listed under various international conservation agreements, including CITES Appendix I, which prohibited international trade in Kouprey specimens. Field surveys conducted by international researchers and conservation organizations attempted to locate remaining populations and assess the species' status. However, these efforts were severely limited by security concerns and the difficulty of accessing remote forest areas during periods of conflict. Captive breeding programs were considered but never successfully implemented. The few Koupreys that were captured for zoos did not survive long in captivity, and no successful breeding occurred in captive settings. This failure highlighted the species' apparent sensitivity to captive conditions and the challenges of maintaining wild cattle in artificial environments. Habitat protection efforts focused on establishing protected areas in regions where Koupreys were thought to survive. However, enforcement of protection measures was often impossible due to ongoing conflicts and lack of resources. Many designated protected areas existed only on paper, with no effective management or protection activities. The mystery deepens. Recent status and sightings. The current status of the Kouprey remains one of zoology's most perplexing mysteries. The last scientifically confirmed sighting of a wild Kouprey occurred in 1988, though unconfirmed reports have continued to emerge sporadically from various parts of the species' former range. Several factors contribute to the uncertainty surrounding the Kouprey's current existence. The remote and often inaccessible nature of potential habitat makes systematic surveys extremely difficult. Many areas where Koupreys might survive remain dangerous due to unexploded ordnance from past conflicts or ongoing security concerns. Camera trap studies conducted in various protected areas throughout Cambodia and Vietnam have failed to produce any confirmed images of Koupreys, though some researchers argue that the coverage of these studies has been insufficient to definitively rule out the species' survival. The challenge lies in the vast areas of potential habitat and the potentially small number of surviving individuals. Local reports and traditional ecological knowledge continue to suggest that Koupreys may still exist in remote areas. Indigenous communities in border regions between Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos occasionally report encounters with large wild cattle that match Kouprey descriptions. However, verifying these reports has proven extremely difficult, and the possibility of misidentification with other species or hybrid animals cannot be ruled out. Genetic studies and taxonomic controversies. Recent advances in genetic analysis have added new dimensions to the Kouprey mystery. DNA studies conducted on museum specimens and bones have revealed surprising relationships between Koupreys and other cattle species, leading to debates about the species' taxonomic status and evolutionary history. Some genetic evidence has suggested that Koupreys may be more closely related to domestic cattle than previously thought, raising questions about whether the species represents a truly wild lineage or possibly a feral population of ancient domestic stock. These findings have sparked intense scientific debate and highlight the complexity of cattle evolution in Southeast Asia. The hybridization potential between Koupreys and domestic cattle has been demonstrated through genetic analysis, suggesting that interbreeding was possible and may have occurred in wild populations. This finding raises the possibility that Kouprey genes may persist in domestic cattle populations throughout the region, even if pure Koupreys no longer exist. However, many researchers argue that the genetic evidence supports the Kouprey's status as a distinct species, pointing to unique morphological characteristics and ecological adaptations that distinguish it from domestic cattle and other wild bovids. The debate continues, with implications for conservation priorities and search efforts. Cultural significance and symbolic importance. The Kouprey holds profound cultural significance in Cambodia, where it serves as the national animal and appears on the country's official seal. This symbolic status reflects the deep connection between the Cambodian people and their natural heritage, as well as the species' representation of the wild, untamed forests that once covered much of the country. Traditional stories and folklore throughout the region often feature the Kouprey as a symbol of strength, independence, and the wild spirit of the forest. These cultural connections have helped maintain awareness of the species even as it has disappeared from the landscape, ensuring that local communities continue to value and remember this remarkable animal. The mystery surrounding the Kouprey's current status has elevated it to almost mythical status among wildlife enthusiasts and conservationists worldwide. Like other lost species, the Kouprey has become a symbol of both the tragedy of extinction and the hope that some remnants of our natural heritage might still survive in remote corners of the world. Future prospects and ongoing research. The search for the Kouprey continues through various means, despite the challenges and uncertainties involved. Modern technology, including improved camera traps, acoustic monitoring devices, and genetic analysis techniques, offers new tools for detecting and studying elusive species. Environmental DNA, EDNA, sampling represents one of the most promising new approaches for Kouprey detection. This technique involves collecting water or soil samples and analyzing them for genetic material that animals leave behind through feces, urine, or shed skin cells. If Koupreys still exist, EDNA sampling might detect their presence even if direct observation remains impossible. Satellite imagery and remote sensing technology provide new ways to identify and monitor potential Kouprey habitat. These tools can help researchers target survey efforts more effectively and identify areas where habitat conditions might still support surviving populations. International collaboration between research institutions, conservation organizations, and government agencies continues to support Kouprey research and conservation efforts. These partnerships are essential for conducting the large-scale, long-term studies necessary to resolve the mystery of the Kouprey's current status. The story of the Kouprey serves as a powerful reminder of both the fragility of wildlife populations and the importance of conservation action before species reach critical thresholds. Whether or not Koupreys still survive in the wild, their legacy continues to inspire conservation efforts throughout Southeast Asia and serves as a symbol of the region's remarkable but threatened biodiversity. As we move forward into an era of increasing environmental challenges, the mystery of the Kouprey remains unsolved, continuing to captivate scientists and conservationists while serving as a poignant symbol of what we stand to lose if we fail to protect the world's remaining wild places and their inhabitants.